Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stones.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
Let's send you out on the right. PFF sucks. Have a great day.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson, live on YouTube, and today talking AFC win totals as we look forward to the 2024 season. Sam, how you doing, man?
Doing good, Steve. New setup here at the new parents' gaff. They've moved from Florida. They're now up in Connecticut, so we have a fancy new studio, which I believe is just as echoey as the last studio based off talking right now. But it's a different setup. It's not quite as glary, not quite as we'll see. Though I did just notice that as soon as we started this thing, everything went kind of skippy and freezy, and maybe the internet isn't amazing here.
Oh no, that's not great. We'll do our best. We're working through it. I hear you fine though, so that's good. Hopefully everyone else can. But yeah, we'll be remote here for the next couple shows talking win totals. Want to kick things off though by reminding you that as a busy parent, you want to give your kids a head start in their financial future. But investing can often be both confusing and time-consuming. But Fabric by Gerber Life makes it easy for you to set up an investment account for your child that grows with them and helps prepare for their financial future. So Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a UGMA account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. UGMA stands for Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. So while your kids can invest while they're minors, a UGMA account allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments more time to grow. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolio is managed by Ford Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Monthly minimum contribution required. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, Sam, we did this last year as well. We're going to split up the AFC and the NFC, go through teams' expected win totals, their odds for next season using DraftKings. And I think last year we did a pretty good job of it, but historically we would get into saying over for everybody, being optimistic for too many teams here. So we'll try to keep it, realistic, we'll say.
Realistic, yeah. We'll give it a best shot.
All right, so we're going to go team by team in the AFC. I'm going to go alphabetically through the AFC. So that starts with the Baltimore Ravens. Remember, it's a 17-game schedule, still reminding us of this.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The over-under for the Baltimore Ravens is 10.5 over at DraftKings. What are your instincts on the Ravens over-under 10.5?
Yeah, the Ravens are an interesting one. I think a lot of people are big fans of what Baltimore have done this season. This offseason, we've talked a lot about what adding Derrick Henry to that backfield could do, and the combination of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. There's a lot of reasons for optimism there, but anytime you mess around with the offensive line that much, I get a little bit concerned. Even if they've rebuilt it back, it's not like they just tore it down and they're expecting 5 rookies or whatever to come in and step in and be good. They have repatched it. But, we know that there's value to continuity on the offensive line. So I think they'll be good, but I do get a little bit concerned that maybe they're not going to be as good as people are expecting them to be.
Yeah, I mean, win totals are historically low relative. Like every year, you usually don't get teams over 11, as far as an over-under. But
right.
In a given season, of course, you'll get a lot of 13, 14-win teams. The Ravens won 13 games last year. So if you're saying under, you're thinking they're going to be, at least 3 games worse than they were last year. Now, the reason why that's certainly possible is that division. The AFC North, where every team was above 500 last year, including the Cincinnati Bengals, who came in last and didn't have Joe Burrow for a big chunk of that time, had Jake Browning take over, but they still won some games. So I think that's the part working against them here. I'm having a tough time thinking under though for Baltimore because that foundation is still so strong.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be, I'm not saying they win, 7, 8, 9 games or whatever, but it would be 10, right? If they get to 10 wins and tap out there, I could buy that. I think I'll lean over, but I could definitely imagine a world where they, like, it sounds stupid, right? Because this is the entire purpose of these things, but the line's in the right place,
Good answer. Let's say that for every team. The line's in the right place.
DraftKings done a good job of setting this line. It's exactly where it should be.
Kudos to DraftKings. All right, I'll take the over for the Ravens, but it's a good line. It's making me think that line. All right, we're going alphabetically, so let's go Buffalo Bills here. Same one. It's over 10.5, Sam. So the Bills, for the Bills and the Ravens, two teams that almost played each other in the AFC Championship, right? A play away for the Bills from playing in the AFC Championship against the Ravens, but both teams maybe go into this season with a little bit less hype, a little bit more discomfort as far as turnover on the roster goes than some of the others. What are your thoughts on the Bills at over 10.5?
I was looking, I grabbed an article that's pre-draft, actually has the Ravens a win better. So apparently the Ravens got a win worse off after the draft.
Oh, really?
Yeah, based off an article on DraftKings.
They were at 11.5?
Yeah, they were up there with the highest win totals in the NFL, and apparently the draft, or at least the time between March 20-something than now, has cost them a win.
Maybe it's because everyone else got hurt. I mean, everyone else got better in the draft.
Yeah.
And they didn't think the Ravens did? I don't know.
Apparently.
All right,
Anyway.
Bills have the same number, 10.5. Where are you going there?
10.5 for the Bills. Again, the Bills are a really good team. But we still, I at least have those concerns about what this offense is going to look like. Now, you can spin that in either direction, right? On the one hand, this is going to be the first sort of full season of that new scheme, of what that's going to be. Remember, they made a coordinator change midway through last season. And okay, anytime you do something like that, the new guy coming in is not going to be completely overhauling the system, right? Like even if he comes from a completely different scheme, coaching tree that has a different language and a different way of doing things and all these kinds of things, you can't institute that at week 8, right? It's a gradual change. You've got to sort of make some tweaks to what's already there and then build upon that in the future. So this is going to be the first full offseason where they're going to see what is this new direction going to be. It's also the first time this offense is going to apply their trade without Stephon Diggs. They traded him away and haven't done a great job on paper of replacing him. Now, the flip side, the positive spin on that is you say, well, okay, we don't need that type of receiver anymore. We're going to go in a different direction. We're going to operate, across the middle more. We're going to use those slot receivers. We're going to have a 2 tight end offense. Like we're moving away effectively from an offense that relied on Stephon Diggs as the primary X receiver, the guy that won on the outside, the alpha within that system. So it doesn't matter that our kind of replacement for him is this hodgepodge of Keon Coleman in the draft and, Marquez Valdez-Scantling as a late free agent signing, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think anytime you start off with Josh Allen, the Bills are going to be in and around the playoffs. They're going to be in and around double-digit wins. But I do have more concerns about them going into this season than I've had for the last 3 years.
Yeah, so the other factor that I keep bringing up, and I mentioned this with the Ravens, is the division. So this is the first year, presumably, the Jets will have Aaron Rodgers and will be a better team. So not that it was easy for the Bills. It came down to the wire in the AFC East last year. But now you have a comparable Dolphins team, a Jets team that I think is very much in that same mix. We just talked about the Jets being a top 5 roster on Monday's show that you should go back and listen to as well when we talk about the best rosters in the NFL. That's what the Bills are competing with. So all of the things that you said, is it a reset year for the Bills? And look, we're 2 years removed from the Chiefs winning a Super Bowl in an expected reset year, right? You're going to get worse before we get better. We're going to get younger. And they still competed because they had that core foundation, a.k.a. the quarterback, intact, right? The Bills have the quarterback. They have Sean McDermott, who has years of success. Right, McDermott has done a great job in Buffalo, combining with Josh Allen's emergence. Remember, they were good before Allen started playing like a superstar. So
Tyrod Taylor got them to the playoffs.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like they have a very good foundation in place, and even if it feels like, hey, we take a step back before we take a step forward, they're still a very good team. So I'm already going to fall into the trap here, Sam, of going over on everybody here. It's impossible. But I'm going to be a Bills believer this whole offseason just to kind of offset some of the negativity that's going to be going Buffalo's way. So give me the over for the Bills.
Well, like I said before, the line's in the right place. It's a very good line.
It's a good. I'll take 10.5. I'll say it's a push.
Doesn't this it sort of feels like if you have an elite level quarterback, like 10 wins is now your baseline, right? Like just simply getting that guy. Almost if all I told you was random roster X started off with this guy at quarterback, whether it's Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, whoever it is, immediately you're like, well, that's 10 wins before we do anything, right? And then tell me about 2 through 53, and I'll tell you how many more than 10 wins we're going to get. So I feel like you get 10 wins. So you get to half a game within this line just by having Josh Allen as the quarterback. And then you look at the rest of the roster and say, is that good enough for the other 52 guys to find another win from somewhere? To which I think the answer is probably yes. Like we saw that last year. There were games where Josh Allen played terribly and they still managed to be, within a play or two of winning or whatever. So I'll go with over on the Bills, even though I am lower on them this time going into a season than I've been for a while.
Just to recap, last year they did tie with the Dolphins record-wise at the top, won the tiebreaker. They were 11-6. They were 5-5 at one point. So it's not a slam dunk over 10.5.
Right.
They did win 11 last year, and they had to, make that late push to do it. It was, getting just to 11 wins was a scary proposition when you're sitting there at week 10. So again, it's not a slam dunk. I think that's part of my instincts are saying go under. Maybe they'll just win 10. Because of the Jets being better, because the Dolphins are still good. I might need to say under for the Bills just to balance out because I looked ahead, Sam.
In your mind.
Listen, I looked ahead. Yeah. The next team we're talking about is Cincinnati Bengals, over under 10.5. So it's the same thing. And look, I don't want to get caught up in here's what happened last year, and here's what's changed, and here's what's going to happen this year based off that. But let's do that for a minute. I don't want to get caught up in it, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Caught up in it. I just want to focus on it right now.
The Bengals were 9-8 last year with a healthy dose of Jake Browning at quarterback. We're assuming health for Joe Burrow here. That has me certainly leaning over the 10.5 here for the Bengals.
Is this, have we transitioned? Have we started? We're into the Bengals now?
Yes, we're into the Bengals. Okay.
Sorry,
which is why when I said I looked ahead, we just went Ravens over under 10.5. Bills were 10.5. Bengals are now 10.5 because that's alphabetically where we are. It's they're all in the same boat here.
Normally, your hosting transitions are so clear and precise. It's this time it was more.
No, it was smooth. It was smooth. The one time I make a smooth segue and you're like, what? What's going on?
So confused by it. Yeah. Yeah. So the Bengals are the one team I think this year where I find more holes in this roster and this team than. So they're the team. Every year there's one of these contenders that is really driven by the quarterback, and you're like, okay, again, baseline with elite quarterback is 10 wins. So Joe Burrow, 10 wins right there. But the Bengals are supposed to be like, this is their year bouncing back, right? Joe Burrow is healthy, everything's good. We still have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. We're back in contention immediately. I just look at the roster, though, and I see too many holes for that to be the obvious end conclusion. Now, they could still be because they got Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, et cetera. But you look at a lot of spaces on this roster, and you're like, they might not have a viable starting cornerback. Forget cornerback 2. They might not have one at all on the roster. I mean, Mike Hilton, I guess, is a slot guy. But an outside corner, they might not have a single viable high-end starter that can go one-on-one.
Cam Taylor-Britt's a good player. Before Bengals fans get in your mentions, he's been good.
He's been solid as a number 2. Now he has to be potentially the number 1, and they might not have anybody on the other side at all. You look at that and you say, they might get lit up by everybody they're playing because they don't have cornerbacks. their defensive line has got some players on it, but it's really Trey Hendrickson driven at this point and not much else. Sheldon Rankins, the rookies rather, they brought in those sort of three to replace DJ Reader. I don't know what kind of impact that's going to have. Sheldon Rankins is okay, but it's a big downgrade, even sort of factoring in the help of Chris Jenkins, et cetera. So I don't know. I look at this team. Even a guy like Geno Stone, right? Safety was a big issue once they moved on from Jesse Bates, and they lost both those guys in the same offseason. Von Bell's there. But Geno Stone is a sort of big acquisition, and he's one of those, like, I think he's a solid player, but he's coming in off a career year, which felt a lot like that year, ages ago where Jarius Byrd had the ball just thrown his way like 10 times in a season. The Saints bought high on that, and he was never that guy. Geno Stone feels a little bit like that to me, where he played very well last season, but was the beneficiary of a lot of passes just sort of landing in his lap. And does that happen again? Probably not. So I have real concerns about the defense. The offensive line, as solid as it is in that creep back toward average world where if you catch the low end of variance, it could still be a problem. So I don't know. I think the Bengals are a good team. I don't think they're a great team this year.
Yeah, I would disagree just because, I agree with a lot of the actual individual assessments. I would disagree in how I weigh those. I don't think I'm terribly worried about the Bengals roster. Like everything that you brought up was viable, but I still think they're on the better side of good. We ranked them as a top 7 or 8 roster the other day. Burrow's probably the driver there. I just think that foundation, I'll view it the other way. Questions on the defense, sure. I think the offensive line's in good enough shape. Still have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. T. Higgins playing for something, right? He wants to get paid. Sure. So Jermaine Burton coming in as potential number 3, of course. Mike Gesicki coming in at tight end. I think that foundation's just so strong. And I'm interested in how they start. If they're going to go over 10.5, the start to the season last year was horrendous because Burrow was playing through injury, didn't have training camp. Other seasons, they just started slow. 2022, they started 0-2, I believe it was, right? They just didn't look right. But I've always given Zach Taylor credit for righting the ship, right? When they had a bad game, they bounced back. When they started slow, they made adjustments. They're going to need to start faster. Like, if they're going to win the AFC North, overcome the Ravens, assuming both quarterbacks are healthy throughout the season, you can't have any lulls earlier in the season. That's going to be the thing where each of the last 3 years, the Bengals, or at least the 2 years where Burrow was healthy. Remember last year they did this, Sam, for a little bit too. So let's say 3 straight years. They hit a stretch where they looked like the best team in the NFL. You said this on our show last year. Best team in the NFL. They just beat the Niners. They're going to hit that stretch, and then Burrow got hurt again. So can they bottle up that consistency for, 17 games? To me, that's the question for the 10.5. I'm going to go over, though. I'm assuming health on Burrow. I'll take over the 10.5. Your concerns are valid, but not strong enough for me to take the under here.
Yeah, and so I'm going to lean the other side. I'll go under with the Bengals. And that sentence you just said there, assuming health with Joe Burrow, that's now becoming not a given, right? Okay, multiple quarterbacks have suffered sort of sequential injuries, right, year after year. Like Lamar Jackson has been injured for multiple seasons in his past, right? The difference with Burrow, though, is that his last 2 injuries have been non-contact things. They've just been something snapped on him, right? Like first practice or something last year, his calf just went, and that was like a problem for the first half of the season. Finally gets healthy from that. And then like throwing the ball, something pops in his wrist, and now he can't, like he's done for the year in a what has been talked about as like a freak injury that nobody's ever seen before from a quarterback. So, and Burrow has said this himself recently that like, when you're sort of when you're footballing mortality, i.e. your health is put in front of you, like, hey, you're not bulletproof. Stuff's gonna break sometimes. It affects you. So for 2 years now, Burrow has, and this is not even, factoring in like rookie year Burrow where somebody collapsed on his leg and, that devastating knee injury because the line was terrible. But like he's now got a fairly extensive history of not being there. So, yeah, we're assuming health for pretty much every quarterback because it's hard to go into the season going, well, that guy's going to get hurt. This guy's going to miss 8 games, So we're assuming it, but I mean, it's less of a guarantee, I think, for Burrow than it might be for maybe any other starting quarterback.
That's fair. That's fair. You just described basically us, 40-year-old men.
Yeah.
I did a thing and my calf blew out. I did a thing and my can't throw anymore. My wrist hurts. I mean, yeah. Is Joe Burrow a 40-something-year-old? Sounds like it, but we'll still assume. Assume his health.
The last quarterback that you could sort of articulate that kind of concern for was Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Where he reached a point where you're like, okay, you just can't assume he's going to be healthy anymore. Now, Burrow isn't quite there yet, but it's on that pathway.
All right. I don't want to go. The one thing I'll say, I thought a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo's injuries were his own doing, right? He took extra hits or whatever. Burrow feels more like freak injury, like the calf, the wrist throwing, of course, the knee in the pocket. Like those are more freak type injuries. That's the only thing I'll say about that.
But remember, G popped an ACL by just cutting in the open field.
I know, but again, he had a choice. He had a choice to run out of bounds or make a move. You know what I mean? It was like he had a shoulder injury in New England where he took a late hit.
But the calf injury, like Joe Burrow had a choice to sit his ass in the pocket or move. And when he tried to move, his calf just went, not today, son.
Whatever.
So, That's
We're on to the Cleveland Browns. We're off Cincinnati. We're on to the Browns. So back to the AFC North again. Over 8.5. I know where you're going here with the Browns. The biggest off-season hype machine for the Browns. It's Sam over there. So tell us why you're taking the over 8.5 here.
Definitely taking the over, and for not the same reasons that we've been saying. I'm saying, look, an elite level quarterback gets you to 10 wins. Write it in stone, and then the rest of the roster is going to get you the rest. The Browns have the opposite problem where they might have the best roster in the NFL, but a quarterback who, in Deshaun Watson, has shown no ability to be an elite quarterback since he's arrived in Cleveland. So to me, this is a 10-win team if Watson plays even average football this year. The roster is that good. If he gets anywhere approaching his better play, they're like a legitimate Super Bowl contender. I just love every aspect of this roster. Really good offensive line. Okay, we don't know what Nick Chubb is going to be coming back off that devastating injury, but I think they've got good contingency there, both of the players that were there before, bringing in Deontay Foreman just in case, as a sort of heavier bell cow type of running back. The defense was phenomenal last year. I think they've done a good job of retaining and adding talent there. I just think this team's phenomenal, with the one question mark being how good is Deshaun Watson going to play?
Yeah, one thing we haven't looked at is schedule strength for these teams.
They're all brutal.
Yeah, I mean, so it's easy in a vacuum to say I like the Bengals roster and I like the Ravens and I like the Browns, but the AFC North, because they're going to play each other, generally have difficult schedules. And then if you go to PFF.com, there's a better breakdown there. So strength of schedule, the hardest schedule in the NFL is the Browns by our numbers here. So the Browns are the worst, the most difficult. The Steelers are the second most difficult. Yep. The Ravens are the fourth most difficult, right? So 3 out of 4 AFC North teams. But because the Bengals have the last place schedule, they're down at 15th, right? So just reverting back to the Bengals discussion, that's another factor maybe in their favor to go over. And now, in a vacuum, if you say, well, the Browns, of course, they won 11 games last year, Sam, 5 quarterbacks, Joe Flacco off the couch, and they won 11. Of course they're going to win more than 8.5 this year, but we're talking the most difficult schedule in the NFL, and our projection, PFF.com, has them at 8.2, right? I mean, just trying to play out the season, sim it out. 8.2 has them right on the cusp. It's a good line, is what I think. It's a good line at 8.5 for the Browns. I'll still lean over because I'm optimistic season. I think they're a very good team. I do at some point expect Deshaun Watson to play better football. Right? You argue with Browns fans. Well, he did. He just got hurt. I don't think he ever really played well. He had a couple decent games in there. Never came close to 2020 level. But at some point, I think he can get there. So I'll take the over for the Browns, but the caveat being most difficult schedule in the NFL per PFF.com.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be tough for any of the teams in that division. It is. I mean, we expect all 4 of those teams to be good. All
right. We're going to go Denver Broncos here if I could find them. Over Over under 5.5 here for the Broncos.
Yeah, there you go. Is that the lowest? That's got to be down there, right?
Well, we just ranked them as the worst roster in the NFL.
Sean Payton got asked about that, apparently.
Oh, wonderful.
I don't know that it necessarily was like, hey, PFF thinks you guys stink, but he definitely got asked about having the roster being ranked as the worst in the NFL somewhere.
We have there was a GM who came into a room one time when they were first meeting PFF before they were clients. We were halfway through the league, and he said, "Hey, you guys, the team that ranked us as one of the worst rosters?" I said, "Yes," and he said, "All right, you're right. Yeah, we're rebuilding," or whatever he said to kind of. But he was like, "Yeah, you were right. You were right in your rankings. Thank you." Anyway, 5.5 is the lowest. No, actually, New England's 4.5, and then the Panthers and the Broncos are both 5.5. From a quick glance here.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Like New England has the worst odds.
Tough scene. So from that perspective, it's fair, right? We think that this roster is terrible. They're probably going to be starting a rookie quarterback for the most part. They don't have an elite supporting system for that rookie quarterback outside of Sean Payton. And then it really just comes down to how bad a season do you think a Sean Payton-led team can actually have is honestly the question here. It's kind of like the Bill Belichick floor, right? It's like, yeah, this doesn't look good. On the other hand, how bad can a Bill Belichick coach team actually be? That's kind of where I am with Sean Payton, where, what did they win last year? 8 games?
They were 8-9. Yeah, they were 8-9 last year.
So it's like, okay, they might stink, but can they really stink to the tune of like 5 games? I don't really think so.
We broke this down the other day when we were talking about their roster. How do you evaluate the Broncos season? Historically bad defense for a few weeks, historically great turnover luck, run for a few weeks where they had a big winning streak, and then it's almost like the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season were the real Broncos. The defense wasn't historically bad, turnovers weren't in their favor at an extreme rate, and they were just okay. And now the question is, as much as we talk about Russell Wilson and what he was, I mean, he was solid, or as one of our listeners reminded me today, cogent is our synonym for solid. And he was cogent last year. He wasn't old Russell Wilson. I don't think he was as bad as 2022 Russell Wilson under Nathaniel Hackett. Now the question is, okay, QB 6 in the draft, Bo Nix. Do you think Bo Nix, like as a 60-game starter in college, does Bo Nix actually have the leg up on some of the other rookie quarterbacks, a J.J. McCarthy, a Caleb Williams? Just because of the experience, he'll actually be more competent right away, but maybe doesn't have the ceiling that some of these other guys have. I don't know how that works, but I think there's that idea that, okay, Bo Nix was the afterthought of first-round quarterbacks, so he's at the helm, and they lost Jerry Jeudy. They lost some of the flash on this team, so plus they're in the division with the Chiefs and the Chargers, and it's going to be a challenge for the Broncos to, win a lot of games.
Yeah, the performance of these first-round rookie quarterbacks generally, I think, is going to be pretty interesting, particularly when we get to the sort of back end. The first 3 obviously were always expected to go really high, but I mean, the next 3, Michael Penix Jr. is not going to start, presumably. The other 2, 4 and 5, J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix. We did that watch along on the 2011 draft class, and that it sort of feels similar, right? In terms of you had the guys that were expected to go right at the top, in particular Cam Newton, but then you reached this point where it felt like we didn't think these quarterbacks were going to go as high as this, and they did. And obviously the team that drafts them is always going to be saying, yeah, we knew this guy was him all the way along. I looked in his backpack, there was nothing but football stuff there. I knew right away he was our guy. And, Sean Payton's selling all kinds of tales about how he was involved in misdirection campaigns and all this kind of stuff, right? But there's very much a chance that, like, he's just Christian Ponder, right? And this is just Christian Ponder adjusted for inflation. 2024, they needed a quarterback. He was the only guy left, so they took him. And if that's the case, I mean, then Sean Payton's really got his work cut out for him, because he's got a guy that he doesn't really believe in, but has to say he is on a roster that might be the worst in the NFL, and he's got to try and get 8 wins out of it somehow. Or he might be right, and actually this quarterback class was 6 guys deep, and people just didn't really appreciate it as much pre-draft. And if that's the case, then then he actually has his quarterback of the future and can make some noise. But I feel overall that there's just not enough good outside of Sean Payton for this team to get, to be anywhere good. But I still think they win 6 games, 7 games.
All right, so you're taking the over on the Broncos?
Yeah.
I'll just take the under. Somebody's got to go under, so I'll take the under here.
Somebody's got to go under.
I feel like Broncos fans are just going to be upset with me throughout the whole offseason. But here we are. All right, Houston Texans. Houston Texans over under 9.5 here. So remember, we had that Bills, Bengals, and Ravens at 10.5.
Yep.
Spoiler alert, the Chiefs are going to be 11.5 when we discuss them. The Texans are 9.5. So they have the odds have the Texans a tick below that second tier of AFC teams that are always challenging the Chiefs. Where would you go here with Houston?
Yeah, are you surprised that this is as low as it is? Now, with that caveat that win totals are always a little bit lower than you think they're going to be. Best teams in the NFL this year, 11.5. So, nobody's sitting there with an expected win total of 14, right? But the Texans won 10 games last year when everyone thought they were going to stink. And this offseason has been all about let's go win now, right? Let's bring in Stephon Diggs. Let's bring in Danielle Hunter. Let's bring in, big needle moving pieces. And yet they're still projected to win half a game less than they actually won last year.
I would say the market is saying let's hedge a little bit on year 2 of CJ Stroud. Did he look like a star and a future superstar last year? Absolutely. Let's hedge just because it's 1 year. Let's just see in year 2. The other part is the AFC South. How hard could it be? And the answer is a little bit more difficult than it was 4 or 5 years ago. It's sneaky good, right? So the Jaguars won 9 games in a disappointing season, right? The Jags should have been better last year. They're a comparable roster. The Colts went 9-8 last year, had basically a play-in game against the Texans in the regular season with Gardner Minshew as their quarterback. They'll get their starter back in Anthony Richardson. And the Titans look much improved this offseason. So I think that's part of it as well. So as much as we talked about the AFC North's depth, the South looks much deeper than they were previously. All that said, I'm of the mind that the Texans are closer to the powerhouses in the AFC than they are the rest of the AFC South. I'm buying Stroud. I'm buying the big moves. I'm buying year 2 of DeMeco Ryans, Bobby Slowick. I'm buying all of that. So I think they should be in that conversation with the Ravens, Bills, and the Bengals as the challenger for the Chiefs. So give me the Texans over here, over 9.5. But I understand why they're there because there's a little hedging going. Just show me one more year in Houston.
Yeah, I mean, I do think so. This feels like one where the hype, the general sort of vibes for the Texans are only in one direction, right? It's everything's good. Look how great they were last year. Year 2 of CJ Stroud, it's going to be amazing. Look at all these pieces they added. This is a Super Bowl team, baby. And so immediately, my default position is always let's tap the brakes on that a little bit because it doesn't always work that way. But I do feel like this team is actually quite legit. Maybe it won't be as simple as, year 2 from that group, it's to the moon and they'll be a real Super Bowl contender. But at this point, I would be surprised if they weren't a playoff team again. And just in order to get that, you're going to need to get to 10 wins. So I feel like this is a fairly easy over, even though, again, I kind of get why the hedging is happening.
All right, let's stay in the AFC South because that's what we do alphabetically here. Indianapolis Colts over 8.5. Where are you going here? So, again, the Colts, 9-8 last year. Gardner Minshew at quarterback. Anthony Richardson comes back. Where are you going with the Colts here?
Yeah, so obviously the inclination from everybody is going to be, they'll be better this year. I don't know that that's the case. I'm not 100% convinced that they were worse with Gardner Minshew at quarterback last year. Now, they're different, and Minshew's not capable of doing some of the things that Richardson is capable of. But he's probably a better quarterback at this point. Now, this is going into year 2 of Richardson. Who knows how much development happened alongside rehab and those kinds of things. So it's we effectively don't know what Anthony Richardson is yet. He's so inexperienced as a quarterback, but yet actually quite far along from a I think, a mental point of view. Like, he's quite sophisticated in how he plays the game. He's not just like a, crazy athlete that's barely played football, doesn't really know what he's doing, is getting by through athleticism and strength and size alone. Like, he's quite a high level pocket passing, pocket processing type of player. We just haven't got the sample size to know what it's going to look like over a period of time. And now you have the complicating factor of, we lent into his rushing ability and he got injured twice, including one serious one that shut him down for the year. Does that change our strategy at all with how we're going to deploy this guy? So this is the one. I feel like this is my sort of Houston Texans correction. I'm buying into the Texans actually getting better this year. I think I'm going to tap the brakes on the Colts and things and say they might actually regress this year with Richardson.
Yeah, I hate looking at the under here because I want to have that optimism as well. I thought there was a lot of positives to Anthony Richardson's game. I think they'll still lean on the run game and just try to do it a little bit, have Richardson be a little smarter. Again, not that he just takes a million hits and always gets hurt, but he's a guy that likes to lower the shoulder and, get that extra yard. He's got the size to do it.
Yeah, you have to. If you're a 245-pound quarterback, you can, as much as we sort of say, look, you got to be smart about these things. You've got to protect yourself. Like, if you're an athletic freak at 245 pounds, you have to use that as a weapon. Otherwise, there is no point. Like, if Josh Allen can't play the game like he's, Cody Kessler, if he did, there's no point in being Josh Allen. You know what I mean?
As I've done my my PFF class for SMWW on Thursday nights, I realized a lot of my references might feel dated to the young students. So when you drop a Cody Kessler reference, like, that's in my wheelhouse, right? It feels like just a couple of years ago we were scouting Cody Kessler for the 2016, I believe, NFL draft. And I realized I drop a lot of mid to 2010 references. And I might need to update some of those, but I get it.
Other than the first round thing, like, Cody Kessler is like, he's the previous Bryce Young in terms of, look, we talk all the time. You go to the Super Bowl, you see all these sort of old quarterbacks walking around. And for somebody my size, right, 5'11", 180, these guys are a different size human to me, right? Like, these guys are 6'5", 6'6", 200 plus pounds. They're huge, right? Bryce Young is not. He's my size. Cody Kessler, I sat at a table with him. He's like my size, right? He might have me by an inch and 10 pounds or whatever, but he's functionally my size, which means he's not functionally NFL size, right? So there's a big difference between a guy like that who wants to play in the NFL. He's got to play in a certain way, and a guy like Josh Allen who's like supersized even for the NFL. Those guys have got to play accordingly. Like, Richardson has got to use his size, physicality, and and strength. Otherwise, there's no point.
So anyway, I didn't mean to derail this thing by looking at your old references. I'm going to lean under for the Colts, but I hate it because I do think they'll get them. I think they'll get more out of Richardson. I've assumed health for every other injured quarterback, right? We assumed health for Lamar last year after 2 injured seasons. He did stay healthy. I'm assuming health for Burrow. I want to assume health for Anthony Richardson, and I am real interested to see what he does with Shane Steichen. And Steichen did a really nice job last year running the show. First year as head coach for the Colts, did a nice job with Minshew. We saw some creative run game type of plays using Richardson, but he's still inconsistent, right? He still missed a few more throws than you'd want. Put the ball in harm's way a few more times than you'd want, put the ball on the turf a couple times when he was running, as much as he does add, value in the run game. So I'll take the under for the Colts. And it's partially because the other team that they're competing with in the AFC South, it's Houston, and then this team, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Because the Jags have the same over-under at 8.5. And call me crazy, but I remain a Trevor Lawrence believer. And I think a lot of the plays last year that didn't go his way, those toe taps, those drops, the nice throws that didn't end up in touchdowns last year that probably should have, if that just reverts back, the Jags are a much better team. I think they made a lot of roster moves that are probably lateral moves overall for the team, and it comes down to the quarterback again. Does he look like the guy who, for a stretch of play in 22, last half of 22 was QB2 by PFF grading? If he goes on that type of stretch, I think the Jags go over the 8.5 here. But they're coming off a pretty bad collapse last season.
Yeah, I'm torn on the Jags because I think what you articulated with the rest of the roster is right. I don't love a lot of the moves they've made. I don't know if they've gotten dramatically better in the offseason, but I do agree with you that Trevor Lawrence is better than he showed last season for a couple of reasons. It is, however, a little bit concerning that, to talk about where he can be, what the kind of player that he can become, we have to sort of limit ourselves to a stretch of the 2022 season. Like he's been in the league for a while now. And the positive explanation for Trevor Lawrence is, well, look at that little run of play in 2022. That's who he could be. You would like for again, he's always, unfortunately, maybe unfairly, he has to be seen in the light of, as a prospect, he was supposed to be truly generational. Like that term is overused. It's used every other year, but Trevor Lawrence was being talked about as the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck. That's a decade plus. Since maybe Peyton Manning. That's 98. That's 25 years. Since John Elway from the early 1980s. Like that's insane. So that's genuinely generational. He hasn't been that guy, even talking about that stretch in 2022. Like he's shown he can be really, really good, but he hasn't looked like that. And maybe he never will. But you're right. If he does get back to that 2022 level, or simply, the first half of last year, if he got the breaks, the highlight reel of plays that were like an inch away, whether it was his fault, whether it was a receiver's fault, whatever, if those just break his way this year, they're immediately a way better team than that. Forget the rest of the roster. Even if that just stayed where it was, they're better if that breaks their direction. So, yeah, I'm kind of torn on how much to weight that. I think generally, that is the most important thing, right? The quarterback playing at a high level. And I think he's definitely going to play better than he did last season between luck and injuries breaking his way. So I would lean over, but probably only by like a half win to 9.
I didn't realize it until I started looking at the grades, but when Lawrence came out, I interpret generational as different. Like I never expected Lawrence to literally step on the field and look like a top 5 quarterback. Never expected it. Because I compared him to Andrew Luck, and I said, well, if you look at what Luck did in his career, grading-wise, performance-wise, for the first 2 or 3 years, he was good, he was fine. He dragged some teams to the playoffs, but he still had to clean up his game. Andrew Luck, by the PFF grading, I'm using it as the standard because I think it is the standard for isolating the player's play. Luck didn't become actually elite. So he had high 70s grades in years 2 and 3. Identical to Trevor Lawrence, high 70s grades. No matter how it was constructed, high 70s grades. Then Luck had an injury-prone 4th season. Let's throw that out. It was terrible. 48 grade. It was just, he was off. But in 16 and 18, his last 2 years, he missed 17. He had 90-plus grades. It took him till year 6 to become the elite quarterback, right? And really his 4th year as starter. And I actually remember predicting that for Lawrence. I said, he might have a Luck-like career where he doesn't look like Mahomes by year 1 or 2. But by year 4, 5, 6, maybe he's up in that echelon. So if the Luck type of ascent is similar, this would be the year, right? This year or next year is happening for Lawrence. And I'm just saying that is in the range of possibilities. Generational to me doesn't mean you're immediately looking like a Hall of Famer in the first 2 or 3 years. That you might progress to that point, and we might be there with Lawrence. So I'll continue to predict that for Trevor every single year until he does it. But I'm going to say the over here for the Jags, 8.5. Puts the Chiefs up on the board, over under 11.5 here for the Chiefs. Remember, they went 11-6 in the regular season last year. So they win it all, obviously, go 4-0 in the playoffs, but 11-6 in the regular season, an uncomfortable worst regular season of the Mahomes era for the Chiefs because that offense was kind of bad, right? Like middle of the pack in scoring last year, but the defense was excellent. What are your thoughts on the Chiefs going over or under 11.5?
Yeah, obviously we know Kansas City, the expectations are set before you do anything else. That idea of a quarterback will get you to 10 wins if he's elite. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid will get you to 11 probably before anything else happens. And last season, they honestly kind of capped out at that point, despite some roster flaws. Like the receivers were bad, genuinely bad. And Travis Kelce did not look like Travis Kelce for an extended period of time. Now, he turned it on the playoffs, but the regular season, Travis Kelce did not look the same. So, the offensive line is a concern this year, but I think they should have upgraded at wide receiver. Travis Kelce is an interesting unknown. Like, has he just started to hit the age where he's not going to look the same, at least early in the season, and maybe he can turn it on the postseason? Or did he just have a bad year deep into his 30s? And that obviously starts you looking for the pattern of decline. Overall, I think, look, Mahomes is amazing. Andy Reid is amazing. The foundation is too good. They're definitely going to win double-digit games. I don't think the division, we talked about how tough the other division is, the North, and how hard it is for teams to get wins in that division. I mean, Denver, we expect to be one of the worst teams out there. I don't think the Jim Harbaugh thing is going to have immediate dividends from the Chargers. I don't think they're going to be amazing right out of the gate. And who knows with the Raiders? They still don't have a quarterback. So theoretically, this should be a division that actually helps Kansas City get wins. So I'm going to lean over because of the fixes they've made to the weakest parts of the team and just hope that they find some sort of solution at offensive tackle.
Yeah, I'll say over for the Chiefs. I think, again, the only thing that might work against them is if they have become a team, because they literally looked like a different team in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And have they become a team that doesn't necessarily sleepwalk through the regular season, but is just good enough, right? Let's make sure we're just good enough. They're not aspiring to go 17-0 necessarily. As a team, they've always had that. I think Andy Reid's teams have always had those levels of inconsistency. They'll lay an egg here and there in games. It's tough, right? It's tough to. That's why I think like the 2007 Patriots actually going 16-0 in the regular season was actually impressive. I know they didn't win the Super Bowl because it's just tough to do. So are the Chiefs going to be the team that is the best in the league? Doesn't necessarily show it from a record standpoint every year, but once they hit the playoffs, they do just turn it on. It was crazy how they did that. So I'll still take over here for the Chiefs. And then the next two teams are AFC West teams that you mentioned. Help in the Chiefs maybe getting over. The Raiders over-under is 6.5 for this season. So with the Raiders, quarterback questions, it's Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. With an okay roster, where are you with the Raiders here?
Have you been working on your transitions while I've been on vacation? This is like 3 or 4 now where you've just like slid it right in there. I'm almost missed the transition entirely.
Yeah, we're on to the Raiders.
Apparently. So this is phenomenal.
We're going to stop talking about the Chiefs, and now we're going to talk about the Las Vegas Raiders.
Got it. Yeah, look, it's conditioned by the quarterback, right? Like this, they're now going into a season again with, now it's a battle. It's Aiden O'Connell versus the of Minshew now and others, right? But that's not a good place to be in. Like, yeah, I mean, Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew are actually very similar players in terms of wildly inconsistent, volatile, mercurial, you might say, and quirky, right? Minshew with his jorts and the beard and everything else he's got going on, and Aiden O'Connell with the mustache. It's an unusual duo to strap yourself to, but it kind of comes down to that. Like, as much as an elite quarterback might get you to 10 wins right out of the gate, I mean, the ceiling for that combination might be 10 wins. Yeah, if everything breaks their way, what are Minshew and O'Connell even capable of getting you to in terms of wins? It might be 10 max. I think that giving the job to Antonio Pierce was the right thing for this roster, even though that's not necessarily always the case for those interim head coaches that, create a bump in performance and all those kinds of things. I feel like that locker room would have rebelled if they hadn't given the job to O'Connell, or to Antonio Pierce rather.
I think that's the tough part to predict, right? It's Pierce. I mean, look, when Urban Meyer left the Jags, he was so bad in so many ways, at a special level of bad, that we just said, okay, they have to be better. Once they get over that hurt, they have to be better. You've pointed out Josh McDaniels' head coaching record is pretty bad historically. And he didn't necessarily make a lot of friends along the way while not winning games, right? It was a bad combination. So just resetting and having a whole year. So having the whole year of Antonio Pierce, and then you look at, okay, Pierce did help that team down the stretch. So how do you weigh that? How do you weigh the defensive performance? Because I'll say it again. I mean, on paper, the Raiders defense doesn't look very good, right? It's Max Crosby. They bring in Christian Wilkins. Malcolm Kuntz had a breakout season. The secondary, like, there's no big names there at all. It's a bunch of okay-looking players, and they put that together to finish 5-4 down the stretch, have some really good games. They gave the Chiefs all they could on Christmas and all that. So how do you weigh those things? Defense, which is usually difficult to predict year over year, and then the interim head coach, which isn't really a thing to use from a predictive standpoint because it's a whole different world and a whole different environment, right? It's Antonio Pierce's show now. It's not him coming in off of what we realized was a year and a half of a disastrous situation with Josh McDaniels. So those are the tough parts to weigh here, because if you just look in isolation and you say first-year head coach with an okay roster and one of the worst quarterback situations in the NFL, no offense to those guys, it just is. So that's why it's 6.5. So it's tough to be excited about that until you realize, hey, there looked like there was a lot to be excited about with the Raiders during the second half of the 23 season because of Pierce and what Patrick Graham did as defensive coordinator and how they came together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different job now, right? Like when you have a team that's sunk as far as they had under McDaniels, and the reasons for sinking that far under McDaniels, like just fixing the sort of environment is a big part of the job for Antonio Pierce, coming in, just not being McDaniels, and then, being the sort of fixing the vibes, right? And getting those things moving in the right direction. And honestly, that is a big part of being a head coach in today's NFL, like the CEO part, the environment, the culture building, all that kind of stuff, right? It's a really important part of the job. But there is another part, which is the schematic stuff, right? The on the field X's and O's, which might not necessarily be the real responsibility of the head coach, not just in Las Vegas, but anywhere, right? As long as you have somebody who's doing that at a high level, you can be fine. And Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, got a ton of credit last season for what he was doing with that defense. But now is the time where, okay, theoretically, you've probably taken the vibes thing as far as you can take it in terms of, all right, we got rid of the guy that was dragging everything down. It was just a bummer across the board. We got good vibes coming in with Antonio Pierce. We got somebody that's been there, done it, understands what it takes to win, all these kinds of things. But now somebody needs to step up and do the X's and O's stuff on a consistent level over a full season and beyond. And that needs to be good. Otherwise, the team won't be. And that, I think, is still an open question. Patrick Graham did really good work last season. Luke Getsy, on offense now, like that's the area that needs to take a big jump this year and get everything working. Otherwise, the Raiders are just not going to be good because, they've got players here or there and they've added them. Christian Wilkins coming in, but it's not a roster that you look at and say, they are going to be good because of the talent they've got.
The shows we're doing now, I think it was the roster rankings that we did the other day, and maybe some over-under discussion too, was the impetus for our bet show. Was the impetus for giving the fans the ability to bet for the season, because we hated on the Raiders a couple of years ago, ranked them as the 23rd roster or whatever it is, and they're still in the same boat. So I'll continue the anti-Raiders agenda, I guess. I'll go under the 6.5 here. What's your final call?
What did they win last year?
8. Yeah. 8-9 with Josh McDaniels holding them down for the first chunk of the season.
I'm going to talk myself into going over for them, even though I don't like it.
Yeah. I understand. But they're in the division with the Chiefs and then the Los Angeles Chargers, which we're transitioning to right now. The Chargers. Stop talking about the Raiders. Now talk about the Chargers.
Well done.
How's that?
Yeah, really
8.5. 8.5 for the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh coming in. I don't know if there's a more fascinating storyline than Justin Herbert on his 4th coordinator in 5 years, is it? And it's Greg Roman.
Yeah.
Greg Roman, who has had success in other places, but mostly with not just a mobile quarterback, but a quarterback run game, right? A Colin Kaepernick, a Lamar Jackson. So in a vacuum, you could say, well, he's led an MVP caliber season from Lamar Jackson. On the other hand, you say, well, Justin Herbert plays the game differently than all those guys. He's very athletic, but you're not running QB power with Justin Herbert. So how is this going to fit?
Yeah, I don't know that that's a foregone conclusion, that you're not necessarily, okay, maybe not that specific play, but like, I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that you're not going to be really leaning into Justin Herbert as a part of the designed run game. I mean, he is like 6'5", 6'6", 235 pounds and athletic with it. I think he can do like a lot of what, Lamar Jackson, Colin Kaepernick, those guys have done. Now, obviously, he's not Lamar Jackson, right? Nobody is. But like, can he do the Josh Allen stuff that we've seen for the last couple of years, where on 3rd and 4th and 1, the Bills are almost unstoppable because Allen is a cheat code. Like, no matter what it's like rock, paper, scissors, right? You can win, you can pick up 4th and 1 in a variety of different ways. And no matter what you do in offense, like Josh Allen is the thing that invalidates whatever you called in rock, paper, scissors, because theoretically you might have called the right defense. You shut down what they want to do. And then Allen either runs over, around, or somehow like gets a pass out from the grasp of tackle and picks it up anyway. I think Herbert can do that for this offense. And I don't think that Greg Roman is going to be looking at this guy and saying, well, everything I usually do goes out the window because I've got this, statue pocket passer now. I got to do something completely different. I think he's looking at Herbert and thinking, all right, how can I use him in the stuff I usually like to do? But I agree with you. It's a fascinating kind of melding of what don't feel like immediate, obvious matches that let's see what this ends up producing.
I mean, the other reason for why you might want to run Herbert, other than, I mean, the negative, of course, is trying to keep him healthy. Yeah. But the other reason is just the receiving core, right? They gutted the receiving core. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams are gone. They went into the draft with probably the worst receiver room in the NFL on paper. They did spend the high second rounder on Lad McConkey. They did make 3 total draft picks at receiver. They bring in DJ Chark, but you're not looking at that room saying, "Oh man, yeah, I gotta chuck it around the yard." So that's what's interesting. Honestly, the Roman thing is such a big question mark for me. If you had told me Jim Harbaugh's coming in and let's say Kellen Moore is still the offensive coordinator, right, I think I'd be even higher on the Chargers, because I think Harbaugh's going to come in and say, we're going to run the ball differently. We are going to run the ball. We're going to play our game. I think Harbaugh does make I think he immediately upgrades this team. I do believe that. I do think they're just going to play this style of football right out of the gate and look much better. So I'm going to go over 8.5. What I'm worried about is the ceiling, and if they're going to ultimately, are you going to get the most out of Justin Herbert? I don't care how many times you run 6 tight ends and run the ball like crazy. If you're not getting the most out of Herbert through the air, then you're leaving something on the table. And I'm just not sure they're capable. I don't know if they're there yet. So I like over 8.5. I think they'll win. They'll look different. But I'm interested to see what happens in the coming years as they build the playmaking group around Herbert to try to maximize what he can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems to be sort of universally accepted that Jim Harbaugh will win with the Chargers. It's just a case of how long it takes. And I kind of agree with that. I think, he's had success literally everywhere he's been. It's actually an amazing resume when you factor in college and the NFL. I do think and with Justin Herbert there, like it's at that point, it's kind of hard not to. I do think it'll work. I don't know that it happens year one though. Like there's just too many problems with this team overall in terms of talent level. Like maybe for a couple of years they were in this spot where you're like, how are they not a better team given the talent that they have? I don't know that they're there anymore. It's been sort of eroded and chipped away at so much. That wide receiver room is bad on paper. I don't know that they have the talent to make that happen year one. So your media card's getting revoked. If you take the under for the Chargers, it's not allowed. It is June. We have to love the Chargers. It's June. I let my dues lapse anyway. They kicked me out a while ago. I'm going under. 8 wins max.
Revoked. Miami Dolphins over under 9.5 for the Dolphins. Again, let's remember Bills Bengals, Ravens in the AFC, all over 10.5. Over under for the Chiefs was 11.5. The Dolphins at 9.5, comparable to the Texans. And the Dolphins are coming off an 11-win season where they did tie record-wise atop the AFC East with the Bills with those 11 wins. So where are you going here with the Dolphins over under 9.5?
They're a really interesting team to kind of predict because, we said if you have an elite quarterback, 10 wins in the bank already. Put it in your pocket and then figure out how many more you're going to get. Tua is elite, but he's able to play at that level within the confines of this offense. So Tua is not an elite quarterback, but Tua plus Mike McDaniel plus like the fastest array of speedsters the NFL may have ever seen collectively, plus an offensive line that's just good enough to keep its head above water. That is an elite level quarterback, right? In totality. So that might get you to 10 wins. But then the Dolphins also have this complicating factor of 2 years in a row now, they've come out of the gate flying and then hit a wall or sort of slowly declined as the season has gone on and then reached, the business end of the season and not been able to win against the better teams. Does that happen again this year? Does that represent, is that still good enough to get you to 10 wins? It's just that the ones that aren't the wins are the important ones. And that's where you end up hitting this sort of glass ceiling of how good they can be. I think Miami and Mike McDaniel are now this really interesting team coach combination where clearly they do some amazing cutting edge stuff. Like that short motion stuff that they broke the league with for a period last season, is a phenomenal sort of leap forward. It's a classic coaching evolution, right? It's a really simple concept that you almost can't believe hasn't been widely taken advantage of before now, and yet almost completely revolutionizes the game in the space of half a season. Now, everybody did start doing that, and even more so this year is going to be starting it. So he's done some amazing things already, but it's an arms race in the NFL. Defenses are going to be better equipped to deal with that now. Has he got another thing up his sleeve coming into this season? I find Miami just one of the most compelling teams in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we were talking roster rankings, I was trying to talk them up a little bit. I like what they've done. They've lost a few players, but secondary looks very good. All of the offensive weapons, they've shown that they can move the ball with that offensive line. Speed out of this world, and the Tua and the Brock Purdy conversations are always very complicated. But at the end of the day, to your point, Tua can put up huge numbers in this offense. He fits it really well. They play to his skill set extremely well. He executes it with his anticipation very, very well. So I think for this exercise, over under, I'm taking the over for Miami. I am much like Dallas. I'm a believer in the Miami Dolphins in the regular season. Sometimes it's tough to remember 2 years ago, but 2 years ago, Tua got hurt. It didn't look the same, but they still go into the playoffs with Skylar Thompson and give the Bills a game, right? Mike McDaniel, it feels uncomfortable that they can't go in and win a playoff game, right? It never really felt like they had a chance to actually upset Kansas City in the cold. But sometimes it does take a couple of years to build this thing up. And so they got better in year 2 under Mike McDaniel. Now we're in year 3. And I think they'll continue to get better. So I'll take the over for the Dolphins. I'm probably going to take the over for every AFC East team.
It's also it's really easy to fall into that kind of trap of just pattern recognition, right? Miami fails to get it done again in the playoffs against a good team in the cold. There's too many narratives that all fit so neatly into that inevitable result of Miami not beating Kansas City. But remember, they also completely ran out of pass rushers at that point. That may have been the single most determinative factor. Not the cold, not the fact that they don't beat good teams, not the fact that, they've had this history of starting well and then fading. The fact that they literally didn't have anybody capable of rushing the passer. That might have been the biggest thing there. So maybe they were, well good enough to beat Kansas City in normal circumstances. It's just that at that point, the injuries had completely removed any real opportunity they had to achieve that. And, if that's your determination, then you look at them this year and you say, okay, they are better than that. They could win 12, 13 games and, be a contender again. So I'm with you. I think they go over.
All right, so over 9.5 for the Miami Dolphins. That brings us to the New England Patriots. I mentioned earlier they might be the lowest. I believe they're the lowest that we've seen. We're using the odds over at DraftKings.com, by the way. Patriots over under 4.5 here.
Yep.
So where would you?
4-win team last year. In the dying embers of the Bill Belichick reign era, whatever we want to call that. Now it's a brave new world with a new quarterback, presumably in Drake May, new head coach in Gerard Mayo, new everything in New England, but what looks like one of the worst rosters in the NFL.
Yeah, I have. So you read the minicamp buzz and this and that, and of course most things are positive. But at the end of the day, I just saw a headline recently which was like, hey, Drake May might have a bright future, but the offense still has a long way to go. To me, that's expected, right? My whole offseason narrative was like, good pick, like Drake May, they're not ready. The pieces around him are not ready for him to shine. Now, if he's a star, maybe he starts dragging them to extra wins and, fourth quarter comebacks, games they shouldn't win, if he's a star. But if he's just, an okay rookie quarterback, which I would expect, I don't think they win a whole lot of games. And then the mishmash of new coaches. It's just it just feels like they're going to need some time. So my leaning here, because I got to go under for somebody, I'll say the under. I think the Patriots are picking in the top 5 next year. So I'll go under 4.5.
Which is obviously with these win totals what they're projected to do. So Drake May, doesn't he feel like a quarterback of this group that might have the broadest range of outcomes? On the one hand, the negativity around him pre-draft was almost overwhelming for a while. On the other hand, you had people like Nate Tice who pushed back and said he's QB1, not just like good, better than people are expecting or are talking about him being, but he's better than Caleb Williams. He should be the number 1 guy in the draft. And then, the consensus appeared to be from within the NFL that as much as the narrative was all negative pre-draft, multiple teams still wanted to draft him number 3 overall. The one that did in the Patriots, and teams like the Vikings who were trying to get to 3 to draft Drake. Right. Yeah. So at least 3 teams were apparently willing to make him the number 3 overall pick, which suggests that the league is closer to where Nate Tice was than the sort of overwhelming negativity that was surrounding him pre-draft. But it overall sort of feels like, he could be the guy. I mean, he's the one with the most experience of dragging a bad team to better performance, right? Like, yeah, his college supporting cast was not as good as these other guys. So theoretically, if he's able to do that and suddenly create this unit of him, Baker, Jalen Polk, the rookies that were drafted at receiver along with him, an offensive line that's good enough to, maintain parity, maybe they could be good and sneak some wins. And I doubt they can be as good as Houston was a year ago, but at least completely blow 4 wins out of the water. On the other hand, if he's actually more of a project, then, if he's closer to the negative narrative, he's actually quite a project. Why didn't he get it done with a bad supporting cast in college, blah, blah, blah. And you look at the rest of the roster and like, they don't have a good offensive line. They don't have good receivers. They've got a young quarterback who's really raw and has a way to go. And the coaching staff is fairly, unproven. Now they've moved on from Bill Belichick. And oh, by the way, the defense that's been so amazing for 25 years might now stink because the architect of that got run out on a cart and is no longer is the scapegoat for last season. The whole team might be awful.
My second Andrew Luck comparison of the show, Drake May feels like the guy that might be like what you used to describe with Andrew Luck, where he starts the fire and then puts it out.
Right.
You might see the opposite of what the Patriots had in Mac Jones, where he would be, quick decisions, get rid of the ball, pretty accurate at his best. But in crunch time, it's like Mac Jones didn't do a whole lot of bring the team down and go get the win, right? The thing that they were used to seeing with Brady so many years. Drake May feels like the guy that might throw the early pick 6, miss a few open throws, but in crunch time is going to make some big plays for you. So to me, that's the thing that might get them over the 4.5. Drake May pulls out some special in crunch time when he needs to. But yeah, it just feels like a lot to overcome. Yeah, in a tough division still, right? We're going to talk the Jets next as I transition to the Jets. I'll take the under for the Patriots. But it's challenging as they're going up against the Bills, Dolphins, in the Jets. Where are you going with the Patriots? What's your final call?
Oh, I hate going under a 4.5 win total because it's such a small.
I am guilty. I have been going over the big totals, the teams that look good, and under the bads. It's a bad look by me. Bad look.
I do feel like they might they might only get 3 or 4 wins again.
Yeah. I hate doing that. But let's go to the Jets. New York Jets, you've got Rodgers back, and they're in that 9.5. That 9.5 bucket. 9.5 was the same as the Dolphins and same as the Texans, if I remember. So again, that's we'll call it third tier of the AFC. The market has the Jets at 9.5, a tick below the Ravens, Bengals, and the Bills.
Yeah. Generally, there's folly to just sort of looking at last year's team and saying they're the same with this one key change. But the Jets won 7 games effectively last season with the worst quarterback situation in the NFL. Rodgers comes onto a team that is broadly similar. I mean, obviously they've made some changes. There's been roster turnover. There's blah, blah, blah. Broadly similar to that, where they've lost players or created a bigger weakness than a year ago. I think they've offset that by improving weak areas like the offensive line. So Rodgers steps onto a team that's broadly similar to last year's. That should be worth more than 3 wins, honestly. Like the difference between Zach Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, even with the unknown of what exactly Rodgers is at 40 years of age, coming off an Achilles injury, it has to be worth more than 3 wins to me. So, look, I've said a year ago, with Rodgers there healthy, this was a Super Bowl contending team. I think it's still a Super Bowl contending team with any version of Aaron Rodgers that looks functional, right? Like if he can move, if he comes back and he's not obviously limping down to down, I feel like any version of Rodgers puts this team above 10 wins and genuinely contending for the postseason or for the playoffs.
All right, so we're going to assume health for Aaron Rodgers. I'll also go the over. I guess my counterpoint to just look at last year is the last time we saw Aaron Rodgers as a full-time starter, the Packers won 8 games. Now, it's a different roster, Packers versus the Jets. I'll take the over for the Jets, but all of it hinges on the old guys, right? It's Rodgers staying healthy. It's Tyron Smith staying healthy. It's Mike Williams staying healthy. And as I've said on other shows, it's the defense, which has been excellent, right? Among the league's best over the last 2 years, staying at that same level. Yes, on paper, it looks comparable. You still have Sauce Gardner on the back end. You still have a slew of pass rushers. All of those things remain, but it is difficult to put up that same level of defensive production year over year. But I'll bank on it. I think the Jets, they should be over the 9.5. And after all of the drama, all of the injuries, all of the stuff going on the last couple of years, the Jets finally get over the hump and become a very competitive team here in 2024.
And that's the thing, right? Like even if Rodgers plays like he did that final season, I feel like that is enough for this team to be double-digit wins. And
I agree. So that was an easy one, I think. We'll take the over for the Jets.
Yep.
Which means if you're keeping track at home, which I hope you're not, I've gone over for the Bills, Dolphins, and Jets in the AFC East, all going over there 9.5 or 10.5. So
well, if the Patriots don't win a game, you might get that done.
That's what needs to happen for this to work. What did I just click on? Pittsburgh Steelers are next. Their over-under's 8.5.
How many teams got left?
Which is 2 more, Steelers and Titans.
Right,
Steelers over under 8.5.
It's right where it should be, right?
Which is right where it should be. You've got Mike Tomlin. I know what your answer is. You're an analytical guy here, Sam. Mike Tomlin never had a losing season. There's 17 games. They're going to win at least 9. You got to take the over.
Not only has he never done it, but is almost always on the level, right? Like on that game with the final game to come. So 8.5 is exactly where the line needs to be because that's where, that's his line. It is fascinating. There's half the people, like he's polarized people now. Half the people are like, Tomlin never had a losing season. Look at the job he's doing. Amazing work, blah, blah, blah. The other half of people are like, when was the last time you won a playoff game, right? The other guy's been run out of town for the recent resume that Mike Tomlin has. Like he's reaching that sort of Mike Shanahan, Denver era, right? Where it's like, I mean, this is nice, but we're not winning, right? We're winning games. We're not winning championships. Those 2 Super Bowls are fading into the distance.
But don't you see why we spend so much time talking about the QB? because what the only difference in the Mike Tomlin discussion is the level of the quarterback. Because when he had Ben Roethlisberger, who was he was somewhere between QB 5 and 8 of his era. I don't think that's a controversial statement to say Brady, Manning, Rodgers, Breeze, special tier of elite, Roethlisberger, and a bunch of others in a second tier of quarterback in that era. That's what Mike Tomlin had. And when he had that guy, they snuck into a Super Bowl in 2008. They snuck into a whole bunch of AFC championships. They were a very good team. The only thing that was different was Roethlisberger got old, got worse for a couple of years, and then he had Kenny Pickett. So that's what's changed with Mike Tomlin. So to me, it's like when you look at it in totality, oh, Mike Tomlin can't be the guy to get over the hump and win a championship. Like, just get him another top 8 quarterback, and he probably can. And it is kind of impressive that with Kenny Pickett and with old man Roethlisberger, they were winning 8 or 9 games. Right? So,
and isn't it funny?
That's how you look at Tomlin.
When you rewind and go back to that, the Mike Shanahan comp, I mean, you can make the same argument with Denver, right? Like when they had John Elway, and okay, even at the end of John Elway's career, when they won the championships, it was like a faded version of Elway, but they offset that by Terrell Davis and other talent, et cetera, et cetera.
Elway was still really good at that point, though. Yeah. He was still very good.
But it was also, it then, when it stopped winning championships and just became winning seasons, it was a post John Elway landscape, right? Which featured like Jake Plummer and Jay Cutler and, the guys that didn't become that, right? So there's a huge degree to which these coaches are all almost not entirely, but like dependent on the quarterback. If you don't have a guy capable of doing this, you're not going to do better than just sneak a winning season and maybe get the playoffs every year. I mean,
That's right. Kyle Shanahan and Andy Reid are the two guys that you could point to that have multiple quarterbacks that they've elevated, multiple quarterbacks that they've won with, multiple quarterbacks that have done better with them than their career baseline.
But even then, right? Like literally Andy Reid got gotten rid of from Philadelphia because he couldn't get over the hump, right? Let's say maybe he did wonders. Like Donovan McNabb didn't look good outside of an Andy Reid, environment. Donovan McNabb went like all we saw from him outside of Andy Reid wasn't good, right? So maybe him actually getting Donovan McNabb to a Super Bowl was a work of wonder that deserves more credit. But like Reid ultimately got run out of Philadelphia because he couldn't get that win. Like eventually they were like, all right, fine, we've seen enough. It's not going to happen. Done. And Shanahan still hasn't quite gotten the news. He's the easiest one to make the case for. Where you're like, okay, he's elevated a bunch of quarterbacks people didn't think had any shot at doing this.
Like I know. I'm not saying they all won Super Bowls. I'm saying multiple years, multiple quarterbacks of them being elevated and bringing them to a high level. Like Tomlin hasn't shown that he can do that. He's shown that he's got this baseline of being good as a team. But when you give him the quarterback, hey, they can make a championship run.
And winning a championship is such a crazy high bar to set that it's like almost every coach is eventually going to get fired if that is your baseline, right? I think winning playoff games is a more reasonable thing, which is why Dallas is in the situation they're in. But like the point being, that's hard enough in itself, right? Even Kirk Cousins is a better quarterback than most of the people we've been talking about in this dynamic, and he trapped the Vikings in this world of, you're probably good enough to make, get to in and around 500, just get over 500. And that's going to either put you into the playoffs or it's going to put you just outside looking in any given season. Like that's the reality of the world if you don't have an elite quarterback most of the time.
All right, let's discuss this exact team then. If the picture that I painted there, and I went down, I think I got caught up in, is Tomlin the right guy for the job? Has he been maxed out in Pittsburgh? I've gone down that road and thought about it. But when I'm looking at it in totality, what if you did give him a top 8 quarterback? So this year, I'm going to take the over as well. Believe in Tomlin. They're going to win their 9 games. What if can they get Russell Wilson back to that top 8 status? Because that's how I view Russell Wilson. Top 8 quarterback in his era, same bucket as Roethlisberger, similar career where they started out a little game managery, winning a lot of games. More was put on their plate, and they still produced. That leveled off for Russ earlier than Roethlisberger, earlier than expected? Can they get him back into that top 8 or top 10 territory? Because if they randomly got 2015, 16, 17 Russell Wilson, this team's unbelievable, right? And none of us are expecting that, but could they get anywhere close? And if they can, yeah, they're really dangerous.
Yeah, I do think the Arthur Smith plus Russell Wilson dynamic, offense coordinator plus quarterback for this team has an extremely broad range of outcomes. Like, I can imagine a world where that combination of scheme and quarterback actually produces really good results. And you get certainly the best version of Russell Wilson we've seen since his real peak years in Seattle. I can also imagine a world where it just doesn't work. And Russell Wilson is just not the type of quarterback that stylistically does the things that Arthur Smith finds most important, and it ultimately blows up completely, and he's not starting for half the season, right? We turn to Justin Fields at some point during the year, and I gotta say, there's a big part of me that wants to see that happen, not because of any ill will to Russell Wilson, but because I actually am maybe more fascinated by what the Arthur Smith plus Justin Fields combination can produce. I'm not ready yet to write off the idea that Justin Fields can become a good high-level quarterback. And maybe it is in a limited might be a pejorative term here, but maybe it is in a specific type of offense, right? Like, there was always that debate of how much did Ryan Tannehill only look good because of that offense? How much did he need that play-action heavy system to get high-end elite play? And if you plucked him out of Tennessee and dropped him somewhere else, he'd go back to looking like, Miami Ryan Tannehill. Maybe Fields will always need a specific offense to play at that kind of level, but I do think it's possible he could play at that kind of level, and I'd be really interested to see what he looks like in this Arthur Smith offense. Maybe not to the point where I would give him the starting job, right away, like just say, hey, Russ, thanks, but no thanks, like chill on the bench. I think I'd probably give Russell Wilson first crack at it, but I'd actually be quite ready. Like, I'd be, I wouldn't have a lot of time for Wilson's struggles before I turned it over to Fields.
I'll say this. I think the league, we're entering, ready for this? We're entering a golden age of QB rehab prospects. How about that?
Okay.
What we've just seen with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, say, having their best seasons in year 6, 7, 8, or in Geno's case, 9 or 10.
Right.
The Justin Fields as a backup, Zach Wilson as a backup, Kenny Pickett as a backup, Sam Howell as a backup, right? I mean, all of these guys who have shown some level of good, not enough good that I want to invest in him as my starter, certainly not, but as a backup who maybe this year, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now comes good. I think it's a special age for that, Sam. Jameis Winston still in that bucket. So I just think it's interesting. Like, I would hold on to those guys and see. I'm with you. I'm fascinated by Fields if he does get a shot here. All right, let's wrap it up. Tennessee Titans. We both went over for the Steelers. Titans over under 6.5 here. A lot of offseason hype for the Titans. Year 2 of Will Levis. Added a lot of talent here. Coming off of a season where they win exactly 6 games. Yeah. And we're putting the over-under right there at 6.5.
So is this all just a referendum on Will Levis? Is that what we're dealing with here? Because they've gotten better on both sides of the ball, right? Independent of the quarterback.
They've gotten better. Now, you could say, if you're a Mike Vrabel believer, right, you could say, man, they lost what looked like one of the better coaches in the NFL, and he couldn't even keep this thing together. They only won the 6 games. But Brian Callahan comes in, got his dad coaching the O-line. There's a lot of positives for the Titans. But again, not to oversimplify, yeah, it comes down to year 2 of Will Levis making this whole thing work with presumably at least a better line, a good group of playmakers, and a defense that added some impact players as well.
Yeah, the line is going to be fascinating because that was the single biggest anchor around this team for the last couple of years. Like, literally the worst offensive line of football for at least the last 2 years. They have upgraded both talent, personnel-wise, and coaching this offseason. So, you bring in guys like J.C. Latham, Lloyd Cushenberry at center, and you bring in Callahan to coach it. Like, those two things should both work to improve this group. And like, it's going to be fascinating to see what impact Callahan can have on guys like incumbent starters that are still there, like Peter Skoronski, who we had really high hopes for, still there left guard, and somebody like Nicolas Petit-Frere, maybe at right tackle, who, from the outside, you'd probably be ready to write off and move on from. But internally, they might look and say, hey, this guy's going to put him on the right path and fix him. Then you've got the additions of wide receiver, Calvin Ridley coming in. I think should be like, this is a good team with the question mark of what Will Levis is going to be. Is he going to be just a flash in the pan and a guy that flashes talent, or has he actually got first round ability that was let slide and now you put a team around him? He could be the guy.
The Titans also have one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. They're tied for 9th. So again, the AFC South, we joked about them being better, but we have the Colts with the 4th easiest schedule. Titans and Jags are tied for the 9th easiest schedule. So they are on that end of easier schedules, especially relative to the rest of the AFC. A lot of those powerhouses where we went over have difficult schedules. Those AFC North teams, the Bills have a very difficult schedule by our numbers. So they are on the easier side. I want to lean over for Tennessee. That probably puts me at 13 overs out of 16 AFC teams. I don't care. I don't care. I'm not here predicting every single game and making it add up, okay? If someone wants to do the research and prove me wrong, I don't care. But it's June. I choose to be optimistic for most teams. So I'll take the over here for the Titans, because I do like a lot of what they've done. I still don't know what to think about Will Levis. I think there's a Jameis-like healthy... There's a Jameis-like discussion to be had here where you're trying to figure out what's the healthy balance of Will Levis's play. Keeping the aggressiveness, but cutting back on a few of the mistakes and the crazy and, trying to lower your shoulder like a linebacker, right? The NFL, as I said last year, the NFL is creating rules left and right to protect quarterbacks, and Will Levis is like, I grew up watching fullbacks lowering their head. I'm going to do it.
He's at that Levis coptering over multiple players in the open field.
Like, Elway saves the Elway copter for the Super Bowl at the end of his career. Levis is like, start number 2, let's go, baby.
Not just that, but on like 2nd and 12. It was like it's a key 4th and 1.
Yeah.
He's like, 2nd and 12, I've got a guy, I can jump over him, let's go.
I got to get to 2nd and 7. Let's do it. You got to jump over this guy. Or 3rd and 7.
I do wonder what effect that has on the rest of the roster, right? Like, is that a galvanizing approach? Like, obviously, it's crazy and suicidal, and a coach is going to be like, dude, what are you doing? Stop it, right? But if you're like his number 1 receiver or his left guard or whatever, are you looking at that and being like, let's go? Our quarterback is, the
analyst in me says, yes, it feels like something. I don't know how much to weigh the feels, right? Does it feel good? Yes. Just like confidence is good to have. But do you, like, when you feel confident, do you actually play better? Does it actually show up in the performance? I don't know.
But I've also seen, enough sort of, sound effects clips, like what are those, the mic'd up stuff, where guys have seen quarterbacks do things like that. And even live on the field, like on the sideline or whatever, teammates have been like, dude, what are you doing? Like, stop that. That's crazy. You can't do that. So I wonder if it's even a positive thing now with the awareness of, like, everyone knows you need that guy upright. So
that's
maybe if a guy's doing it in the 1980s, everyone's loving it. It's like, let's go. Now you've got enough people, even on your own offense, being like, come on, dude, just rein it back. Maybe in the key 4th and 1 in the Super Bowl, week 3 on 2nd and 12, I don't need that. I don't want it. I don't want to see it again. Don't do it.
So what's your final call here on the Titans over under 6.5?
I have to keep back in the Will Levis thing. I liked him as a prospect more than most. I saw enough flashes year 1 with no help around him. I think the team has gotten better on both sides of the ball in the offseason, so why wouldn't they win more than 6 games?
All right, we'll stick with it. We're both taking the over on the Titans. Again, I don't care if it adds up. Maybe I'll be negative for the NFC. Who knows? But we're through the AFC here, going through our win totals. Thanks to DraftKings for giving us those win totals. They gave them to us directly. They put them on the website, and we just looked at them. But yeah, shout out to DraftKings for their win totals. And we'll be back on Monday. We'll go through the entire NFC with win totals. When do you get back from Connecticut now?
For the Thursday show. When am I even? I think I'm flying back on Friday, on the Wednesday. So I'll be in studio for Thursday, but next Monday will be from here.
Okay, so remote again on Monday, talking NFC win totals, and then back in studio next week. We're trying to get some exciting Madden-related content going. We're gonna go back to our expansion teams and try to build our expansion teams in the coming weeks. So we have a lot of good, exciting stuff coming during the offseason here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, hopefully, we seem to have found a new, like you just pulled out the war from our teams, and apparently that somehow did not net my team the number one overall pick. Which, given
I'll look at it again. I'll look at it better.
Is a screaming tragedy. But if the plan, as it currently sits, pending technical, experimentation, is to sim a Madden season last year using our rosters and have Madden conclude where we fit in this offseason in terms of draft slot, et cetera, et cetera. So I have full faith and confidence that if my roster is plugged into the Madden sim, I will have the number one overall pick heading into this offseason.
We're trying any system that gets you Caleb Williams here in year 2. Okay.
Now Madden might screw me because as much as we know and witnessed, CJ Stroud looking way, way, way better than Bryce Young, I would assume Madden had them.
Well, that's my question. So I don't know how it works right now because I know you get your rosters online. Right. The old school game would be like, oh, you've got your preseason rosters loaded in, and then you have to go and get the updated ones. If we put in the preseason rosters where, Bryce Young's probably rated ahead of CJ Stroud in the preseason, if we have to use the postseason update, we have to use the current roster update, knowing what we know about the players, sim those games, and then you'll probably have the number one overall pick. Yeah.
Most recent.
Yeah. So even if we don't do that, I'll look at WAR again just to make sure. But you're cutting out. It's time to go. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again on Monday for more PFF NFL Podcast.